Big update from the IRS regarding the new rule about reporting $600 or more of transactions through network processors, payment processors like Venmo and PayPal, those sorts of things. New rule, you're going to want to know this. I'll explain that more coming up. My name is Mike Bernard. I'm the host of the Wise Money Show. I'm also one of the certified financial planners right here at Korhorn Financial Group. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and smash that thumbs up button. Do you use Venmo? Of course you do, maybe reluctantly, or maybe your kids are pestering you to use Venmo or whatever, or maybe PayPal. Of course, we've all used that, or Cash App. I've never used it. Or what about Apple Pay? And I'm not talking Apple Pay at McDonald's or whatever. I'm talking about, paying, giving someone money peer-to-peer, where you're, splitting the price of the pizza, or maybe you gave a gift to a family member or a friend over the holidays, and you used the Apple, kind of cash transfer as opposed to you writing a check or something like that. Of course, we're all using that. It's sort of part of the kind of our society right now, and a big rule was changing in the IRS for 2022, 1/1 of 2022, that was going to change the reporting of this. You know this because I've done some videos on it and you've heard about it. Changing the threshold for, listen, if you have more than $600 or more of transactions, then you're going to have a tax form related to this. And not only you have a tax form, but the IRS gets one, which means you've got to include it on your tax return. It's going to create a whole bunch of confusion and all of that. And so I've done some videos about it. I think it will create a lot of confusion. Thankfully, the IRS just issued an update as well. All right, so before we get into the update, just to clarify what's going on here, this prior to 1/1 of 2022, the old rule regarding a tax form, a 1099-K tax form reporting this, is you needed to have $20,000 or more of transactions through these network processors, Venmo, that sort of thing, and you needed to have 200 or more overall transactions. So it needed to be both of those big numbers. Very few people actually got this form. Very few people, businesses that would use it, might qualify and they would get this tax form, but they're going to report this anyway. Most of us consumers, no, we didn't hit those thresholds. That was prior to 1/1 of 2022. Well, during the American Rescue Plan Act, they were trying to, one of the stimulus bills, they tried to kind of clamp down on people avoiding claiming some of this money on their tax return, and therefore they changed it. Instead of 20,000 of transactions, it was 600 of transactions, and there's no longer a limit where you need to have a certain number of transactions in order to trigger it. It could just be one transaction. But if it's $600 or more in aggregate, then you're going to get a tax form, and not just you will get that 1099-K, but the IRS does as well, and therefore you've got to report this on your tax return. It's going to create massive confusion, a lot of frustration, more challenging for you as a taxpayer, more challenging for your CPA and tax preparer. It's going to be a big, big, big mess. Thankfully, the IRS just recently came out and said they're going to delay the rollout of that rule. The IRS and Treasury heard a number of concerns regarding the timeline of implementation of these changes under the American Rescue Plan. Of course they did. Of course they did. I'm an optimistic person, although I do kind of like to complain about the government. But yeah, as I did some videos about this, it's hard to think this was going to go well. This is going to create massive confusion. Trust me, it still will. But yes, forcing it to be implemented in 2022 right now in the spring of 2023 for your taxes is going to be a disaster. To help smooth the transition and ensure clarity for taxpayers, that's all of us, tax professionals in the industry, the IRS will delay implementation of the 1099-K changes. The additional time will help reduce confusion during the upcoming 2023 tax filing season, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so my understanding is it's going to be delayed a year, although I still wonder if they're going to be able to pull that off. Because here's the thing. This is what you need to know. Yes, they're delaying it, and you might just say, whew, right? But here's what you need to know. When you're splitting the price of a pizza, or when you're making a gift of $20 to someone, or when, and this happens all the time. I'm in travel sports with our kids, and my youngest is hanging out with another family's youngest, and they decide to go to the concession stand, and pretty soon my kid comes back with a sucker and a water and all that sort of stuff, and I feel bad, and so you'd say, well, how much did that cost? And you send $2 to the family because they spent something, or whatever it is. We've all done that. That's not taxable. That's not the simple peer-to-peer finances. That's not taxable. And these apps are supposed to have you indicate this is not a taxable transaction, and therefore that shouldn't count towards your $600 limit, and you shouldn't get a tax form from it. Most of the Venmo that I use, and certainly when I'm using the Apple Pay transfer, I'm never asked whether this is for personal or for business. I'm never asked. Some people say, oh yeah, I am with Venmo. I've never been asked. And so I just don't see how they're able to pull this off, or currently how they're able to pull off, well, that was just peer-to-peer, that shouldn't be taxable, versus, and I just had this, a client has a child house sitting for someone else, and they're getting paid for that. Okay, technically that would fall under some compensation. And you might say, well, that's mean and that's cruel. I know, but that's technically compensation. So a different one though, a different one. Facebook Marketplace or PayPal or something where you are selling some sort of used furniture or selling some memorabilia. My son is really into baseball cards right now. So if he sold a baseball card or something like that, those sorts of things, that's what this whole rule is intended to crack down on. That is supposed to be included as taxable income, or at least reported income. And then you need to file that on your tax return and then list, yeah, my cost was this. So take a baseball card. Say if my child sold a baseball card for $100, but he actually bought that baseball card for $2, well, he's got to report that on his tax return and the $98 difference, that's what is taxable, okay? So here's the thing. Thankfully, they've delayed the rollout of this because it was going to be an epic disaster. I still think a year from now, it certainly has the chance of being so, because I just don't know how they're going to reconcile this. But so that you know, your peer-to-peer transactions, where there's no compensation, there's no business, there's no exchange of goods or value, that's not taxable, that's not reportable, it never has been and shouldn't be, okay? I do think it's going to be mistakenly reported on tax documents, but you'll just need to clarify that this is not taxable, that was peer-to-peer. So this doesn't change it, other than it's going to avoid having erroneous tax forms being sent out. But those of you that are engaged in some sort of work and are getting paid through Venmo, paid through PayPal, something like that, that's always needed to be reported, whether you get a tax form or not. And I'm not trying to be a meanie. I'm just telling you that's how it's always intended to be. And it's sort of self-reporting, self-compliance, where, yeah, if you're doing, if you're house sitting, or if you're selling a baseball card or selling used furniture, if you make a gain on that, if there's net income to you in exchange for a good or service, you've got to report that on your tax return, whether you get a tax form or not. All right, so there you have it. Thankfully, though, forcing all these companies to issue these tax forms was going to create a lot of errors. They've delayed that, so you shouldn't get a 1099-K this year. That's good. You still need to report any of that income that is business, but it will avoid a lot of errors. And then we'll see. We'll see if the IRS is able to enforce this year, a year from now, or whether they're going to delay it again. Work with your certified financial planner. If you have questions on, well, I do have some payments going through. This would technically be a side business. How do I report that? What are the tax consequences? How can I plan around that? Your CFP can help you with that. If you don't have a CFP on your team, contact one on my team. Find us online, Korhorn.com. That's Korhorn with K, wisemoneyshow.com. You can find us there as well, or send us an email, info@korhorn.com. All right, there you have it. Go out and take your next wise step in your financial life.